Hello, hi guys.
Hello.
I'm
How
very
are
excited.
you?
Everybody.
Very good, thank you. Excited to wrap up my final session of the day before I hand over to Nick Ranger. Appreciate this is only a 30-minute slot, so I won't hang around too much, but really excited to get into this next session. So Andrew, you could introduce yourself, then Liraz, then Jes, and then crack on with the slides.
Great.
Yeah. Andrew Coco, you can see my Twitter handle there. I work for the Walt Disney Company under the Parks Experiences Products Division, mostly leading our SEO efforts for shopdisney.com and our Disney stores, so both the e-commerce and retail play.
Great. My name is Liraz Postan. Hi, everyone. I've been watching this webinar from the very beginning, so it's a great, and your page are amazing, and also great sessions. I've been in the industry for almost 13 years, doing SEO and content strategy. Now I'm consultant for B2B companies, mostly international SEO, for site migrations, e-commerce SEO, JavaScript sites, etc. So follow me on Twitter and let's chat.
And I'm Jes Scholz. I head up our marketing division for the international teams at the Swiss media company Ringier. And today I'm going to be talking to everybody about all of the mistakes. Some of them I've made myself, some of them I've seen others make, some of them lots of people make, but all about pagination. So I will share my screen.
Yeah, if you get your slides up, and we'll dive straight in. Pagination, I think, is definitely a topic that people don't know enough about, so I'm really excited for this session.
So pretty early on in the SEO game, you're going to come across the challenge of pagination. And it's a very tricky level to pass because the rules keep changing, often because Google doesn't know what their own algorithm is doing half of the time. Like when they had to admit that their rel equals previous next hadn't been used in years. The purpose of these tags was to direct Google to consolidate the paginated series signals to the root page, which would then be the one ranked in search results. But it no longer worked that way and seemingly hadn't for a while. And with this one little announcement, the SEO community freaked out about how pagination was bad for SEO, that it eats crawl budgets and dilutes ranking signals, causes duplicate or thin content. And there are many examples of the web where this does hold true. But in most cases, this is caused by lack of correct pagination handling rather than the existence of pagination itself. And this is understandable because there is so much misinformation out there, recommendations that are outdated, poorly explained, or just plain wrong. I see pagination handling like a little game. There are many possible plays you can make to win, but you need to know what tactics will work best for each situation. So today, I'm going to take you through the 9 strategies written in the playbook of the internet. Starting with the easiest, what I've termed the lazy Pac-Man approach, where you handle pagination by doing nothing. And on the surface, this approach seems fine. Pagination is crawlable, indexable, has recognizable links to deeper pages, but eventually you're going to get eaten because it means putting your trust in Google to discover and understand how to treat paginated pages all by itself. And that isn't an SEO strategy. If there is one common rule of gaming, it is never give control over the gameplay to your opponent. There is always value in giving clear guidance to Google how you want them to crawl, index, and display your content. By doing nothing, you're gambling with your SEO, and at one point, it will be game over. Another very common but misinformed play is what I call the Boggle Google approach, which encourages you to canonical all paginated results to the root page of the series in an attempt to consolidate the authority from the paginated pages to the root page. But canonicals will only be honored by Google when the content is the same, and this is not the case for paginated pages. So Google will likely just ignore your signal and proceed to crawl and index your pagination however they wish. So in the end, you're still not in control, but it's worse than doing nothing, as you look like a fool and waste developer time. So again, that's game over, and you have to hit the restart button. A popular approach in the past was to have your visitors play a game of snakes and ladders. Most of the time, this was done to bolster page views and ad revenues. So non-Google visitors were downgraded to a user experience based on a paginated series where they'd have to click and click and click again to consume little pieces of the total content, while those coming from Google, including Googlebot itself, would land on the canonical View All page displaying all the component page content. This is not only unnecessarily complex, as it takes longer to crawl and process all of those pages, but it can be damaging to your brand due to the poor user experience for non-Google visitors. So let's make this super simple. If you can display your content on a single URL while offering acceptable load times, don't use pagination. And if you can't, well, then you're still going to need a proper pagination handling strategy. So many websites needed to hit the restart button on this one. But some refused to give up on the idea of having content displayed on a single page. And so they tried to implement something I call the double trouble approach, where you offer a single page user experience with infinite scroll, where all content is prefetched and added directly to the user's current page as they scroll down, or load more, where content is rendered upon the click of the View More button. Both of these approaches are often much more fun for the users, but Googlebot, it doesn't want to play your game. It won't emulate behaviors like scrolling or clicking, meaning that without help, Google can't crawl any destination page links that are shown after a scroll or click event. If infinite scroll or load more offer a better user experience, by all means, please do use them. But understand that for them to be SEO friendly, you have to convert the single page experiences into an equivalent paginated series, which means you still need to decide on a pagination handling strategy. And so we're back to square one. But maybe you're wondering, well, why is it important for Google to be able to crawl paginated pages in the first place? Because not everyone believes that it is. So they use what I call the connect for fail approach, an attempt to avoid the issue of pagination handling altogether by simply blocking Google from crawling paginated URLs, for example, with a robots.txt disallow. The perceived upside of this approach is that it saves crawl budget, but John Mueller has said many times that for most sites, crawl budget is overrated and not something you need to worry about. And for that perceived crawl budget win, you're going to be doing a lot of damage. If you're an e-commerce site, where are all your products linked? If you're a blog, how does Googlebot get to your articles? Not every piece of content can be linked on a root category page. Most are connected by links on pagination. So if you block crawlers, you're orphaning all of those deeper level pages. Now, of course, you shouldn't be relying on pagination for Google to discover your content. You should have XML sitemaps optimized for that. But it's not only about discoverability. It's also about the internal link equity or page rank that those pages pass to their destination content pages, which is important since the vast majority of content is not going to get any external links. By not crawling paginated pages, you'll impact the deeper level page's ability to rank in Google search. And ultimately, you'll fail to make the connections necessary to win the game. So we need to crawl pagination to process the internal links. But you don't want paginated pages in the search results. So why not set a no index directive on them? I call that the Scrabble folly, where you end up arguing with Google about what's in a word. On the surface, it seems the only cost of no indexing pagination is the loss of those component page ranking signals, which should be minimal in any case, and without rel equals previous next, we have no way to pass those to the root page. The problem is a long-term no index tag on a page will eventually lead Google to no follow the links on that page as well. So again, all those deeper pages linked from pagination run the risk of being orphaned and not getting the internal links that they need. Essentially, this is just a slower way to get to the same negative outcome as blocking pagination crawling. And I think we've lost enough games by now. So let's talk about 3 winning strategies. The most dependable, I call the checkers gambit, because the implementation is rather simple, but you have to have a clear focus on the end game of overall organic sessions and be willing to sacrifice as necessary to get there. And to do this, you make your whole paginated series self-canonicalizing and indexable to get all of that lovely link equity for the deeper pages. The challenge is that every paginated page is then eligible to compete against the root page for rankings, as Google treats them just like any other page on your website. And so every so often, you will see paginated pages outranking the root page and pulling in the organic sessions. To dissuade Google from ranking the paginated page in the SERP, you can purposefully modify the on-page elements to be suboptimal. For example, by communicating at the start of the page title, meta description, and H1 that it is a paginated page. Or if you have useful on-page text and an optimized category image, only show these on the root category page. Don't replicate them across all of the paginated pages. Now, this might not be the most elegant solution, but you need to keep your eye on the prize. By indexing paginated pages, you boost the ability of the deeper pages to rank. And this is a dependable strategy to an SEO win, but it's not going to earn you Grandmaster status because sites will still have hundreds, if not thousands, of paginated URLs. We know these are worth the crawl budget in order to process the internal links, but they may also be causing index bloat because the paginated pages themselves are intentionally suboptimal from an SEO perspective and link to all your deep content pages, no matter how old, and with no concern for quality. There are 2 plays you can make to combat this. The first I call the backgammon defense, where you leave pagination indexable only up to a certain point in the series. If you have a well-designed site architecture with appropriately deep categories, intelligent use of tags, and other taxonomy options, while it's unlikely every valuable deep page is linked from a root page, you can have the vast majority linked early within a paginated series. Then, you can make your paginated series partially indexable. For example, you could no index from page 10 to cut down on the index bloat and focus the crawlers. This can work extremely well for strong domains that organically thrive primarily off their fresh content, such as a breaking news site or a classified site, but would be an absolute disaster for sites built on evergreen content or for weaker domains that need to rely more on internal links. So this can be a winning play if you know when to use it, trading internal links against crawl and paginated page indexing, but it is risky, so you need to test how it impacts your site. And lastly, for those who intricately understand and control the details of content strategy on their website, you have the chess variation, where the pagination rules themselves are exactly the same as the checkers gambit. All paginated pages are indexable with intentionally suboptimal SEO elements. The difference is what's allowed into the pagination. After all, you only care about internal link equity flowing to pages you're trying to rank, which is unlikely to be every piece of content that you have ever created. So for any historical content that is no longer SEO relevant, essentially your time-limited content, you can have an automated archive criteria, which after a certain number of days removes the content from the paginated series XML sitemaps and other areas that promote SEO visibility. If this works well, you can attack even harder by adding a no index tag or going all out and 410ing or 301 redirecting those pages. This strategy keeps pagination lean, ensuring crawl is invested mainly into fresh or SEO relevant content, reducing index bloat and focusing internal link equity exclusively on those pages that need it. But this play is reserved for grandmaster SEOs, as its implementation is extremely complex and it requires deep analysis. So let's review the strategy scorecard. There are many pagination tactics in use by sites today, which are misguided or outdated. So be sure that yours allows crawling, indexing, and passes page rank to destination pages that matter. And once you have those basics in place, you can test the impact of more advanced strategies, such as partial or rule-based pagination. Now, for those of you who were wondering, yes, I was inspired for the theme of this deck by the Queen's Gambit, and I hope you've all enjoyed this masterclass and feel confident to go and play the pagination game like a pro. So I hope there's now some questions for me and the other panelists.
Brilliant job, Jess. That was amazing. I think that is quite possibly the best, just way of getting your head around pagination that I've ever seen. That was so fun. Thank you. Andrew, Liraz, what did you think?
I love when a deck is crafted around a story, and that was like a 10 out of 10 on that. That was amazing.
Totally. You saw the comment.
Yeah, particularly number 7, where you're basically harnessing the power of negative SEO for good. Oh, I'm feeling very creative. Cool. So we've got some questions. So the first one in the panel was from Starcom Inc. saying, does any of this apply to having a read more button? Does this mean that content isn't weighted as highly as visible content? I feel like this is going to be a very much it depends answer, but take it away, guys. Do you want to go first?
I can answer from my own experience. Basically, I tested it. We lost a lot of rankings and a lot of, let's say, when I cached the pages, I compared the versions of without read more or with read more. There were really great results, when we took off the read more buttons, because read more buttons are JavaScript, and most of the times Google doesn't reach the whole scrolling. It's like infinite scroll. It doesn't really reach the whole content. If it's a lot of loading every time, and this is what we got. Once we got to remove the buttons for JavaScript read more, we just got the whole page cached. We saw Google doesn't have any difficulties with reading our content, and we just jumped in rankings. But this is just my experience. So in some sites, we can totally see the opposite, but it really depends.
Yeah. Andrew, have you had any issues with read mores and expandable boxes?
I've actually had the same experience that she just described, where pretty much exactly that. On the top of an e-commerce page, we had a read more button.
Yeah, I think it's very much how it's delivered, isn't it? If you're relying on JavaScript and that code and that text isn't visible to the bots, if they've got to click it, then it's not going to see it. Google can't click, as Jess kindly said, they can't click and they can't scroll. Very important for us to bear that in mind. So the next one is from Dan Saunders. I think, Jess, you might be the only one that can answer this. What steps would someone need to take to become a pagination chess master?
Well, the first step is lose many, 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 many games. Then you figure out a winning strategy and read the playbooks. You've just got to see what's out there, what's working. You really need to understand JavaScript if you do want to go down the infinite scroll route. You'll need to understand the importance of Ahref links over on-click links or other creative things that developers love to come up with in their new JavaScript frameworks. And you're like, please stop with the new JavaScript framework. How about we just stop with anything but vanilla JavaScript for a while? Yeah. And
You sound like a grumpy old man, like, stop being new and different.
And I think to your point about lose a lot of games first, right, is that a lot of us have already lost those games, right? So learn from Jes's deck and try to not have to lose those ones that she just pointed out that already you're fighting a losing battle.
Absolutely. So we've got a new question in from Lauren Taylor. My boss thinks we should forego pagination and just pull up a table of content with all of our news and blog articles to avoid the pagination issue entirely. But is that a good user experience?
I would be concerned about scale. If you're going to keep that list down to 10, maybe you can get away with 15. That's okay, but how is that going to allow you to grow organically beyond that small set? I think if you're in a very clear niche where there's only 15 articles to write and you just keep those up to date, sure, go ahead. But if that's not, you're not in that 1% of you work in a very specific niche, it's probably going to hit a problem of scale quite quickly.
Yeah. And I would say sorting is going to be very important if you do go that route. Like if it is a limited amount of articles or something like that, the sorting of that is very important for that user experience. If that's what you're trying to keep in mind, you want the good stuff up top, but probably not a route that I would go if I had a ton of things to list on a single page.
Yeah, and it's definitely an issue of just like handling old content, right? I think, Liraz, did you have an experience with just handling old versus fresh content?
Well, totally. Like this is the day-to-day work routine. Like I think for everyone, we all the time keep doing like content audits, making sure all content that we've done to make it evergreen. If it's outdated, let's remove it. Let's route it. Let's decide what to do with it. But this is like basically one of the daily tasks when I'm dealing really big sites and big corporations. Sometimes it started with a small startup and now it's a big corporation, lots of articles, lots of, so the CEO and founder used to write like a small blog from his office. It's generating a lot of money for the company. So we need to clean a lot of things. And by the way, like clean up is doing really amazing results for any site. Just don't be afraid to delete, to redirect, to refresh. It's okay.
Yeah.
Like really best practice.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people don't consolidate enough of their content, particularly if you're talking about the same thing over and over again. Just smush it all into one like amazing page. Obviously, that doesn't work all the time. Andrew, were you going to say something there?
No, I was just laughing in like agreement of, yeah, consolidation and deleting stuff is really nice, but also be careful, especially like I think you pointed out, like if it was the CEO's or owner's blog, like be careful deleting those ones.
We've got a question from Drew Marlier. Can you point us to a specifically good example of pagination out in the wild?
There is a technically implemented, although it looks terrible, example of infinite scroll pagination by John Mueller running around on the internet. So I can find the link and post it in the
infinite scroll done well.
Yes, infinite scroll done ugly. It is super ugly, but it's technically done well. Yeah.
I know it off the top of my head. It's scrollsample.appspot.com.
Thank you.
Wow, I'm going to totally check that out.
I've had to put that into Jira tickets. I know that well.
As an example of what your dev should be doing, is that what you used it?
I think it's a good implementation of an infinite scroll. Yeah. I don't know if that's what your dev team should be doing, right? As Jes pointed out, there's plenty of different winning strategies, and it's dependent on your site. But if you're going with the infinite scroll, I think it's a good option.
Nice. I mean, I'll be honest, I very rarely have to deal with pagination. I am a massive fan of IA restructures, where I pull an entire site apart and rebuild it brick by brick based on the keywords. It's kind of like OCD and SEO colliding in this beautiful thing. And because of that, I've not really had to worry too much about pagination, but I think this talk has been so helpful if ever I have to come across that. What do you guys think?
Super. I think that most of the time SEOs doesn't really consider it as a strategy. Like it's let's say for WordPress sites, it's like one-off setting. You know, they don't even have to worry about anything. So I think if we like run a poll on Twitter, like ask what are you guys doing with pagination? So most of the guys like will say we're not doing anything, or maybe canonical to the first page. Like this is the max strategy. And I think the session has brought a lot of good tips and a lot of takeaways that, and of course we need to make sure that pagination, it has its own strategy. If it's an e-commerce pagination and the products are there, or even it's an article or evergreen articles, new articles, old articles, we have a lot of things to consider when we're talking about pagination. So this is a great session.
I think another thing to know, I just focused on the technical SEO implementation, but what your pagination looks like, how many links you choose to have there, that really does impact how Google will crawl through those pages. But you've got to balance that with a usable design on mobile. So a lot of people don't pay any attention. They're just like, oh, that's for the UX team to do, or that's just kind of like the developers just make it look like whatever they want. But actually, what you choose to have, if you have a first and a last page and then 2 links in the middle, or if you just have the next button, those two are very different in terms of how Google's then going to crawl through and discover those deep link pages.
Yeah, I think I saw a question earlier, like how deep is too deep? Because obviously we don't want things to be so many clicks away. So do you have a cutoff point?
I would say that's kind of my 8th strategy. I would cut off if I was a site that depended on time limited content for 90% of my SEO, then I would have a cutoff point. But if you're not a time limited based business model, then don't have a cutoff point, keep your site clean. It's harder, but it's worth it in the long term if you can pull it off.
Nice, nice. And are there any industries where you see pagination working particularly well? Oh.
Well, I can't answer badly. Oh, I've got many.
Okay, what sector is the worst offender?
E-commerce, because they think they're the smartest.
I love that. I love that. And a question for you, Andrew. I think that one thing that comes up quite a lot is what is best practice versus what's actually easiest to implement. And I think you've had a bit of experience with that in your line of work.
Yeah, and I work in e-commerce too. So nice that Jes shouted that out. Yeah, I think it's best practice, and what can be done is always a balance, right? There's different teams that you have to work with to get these things done. Like Jes mentioned, there's dev side of things, just the technical things, and UX. So sometimes, especially at big organizations, completely different teams. So balancing that and making sure you're in those conversations. If they're having that conversation from a UX perspective about how many pages do we even list at the bottom, just be involved and speak up in those meetings, let them know what your point of view is. And then, there's always a middle ground where you guys or all teams can get what they want. So I think just being in discussions that have something to do with this, you'll be able to get farther than just having to fix it after the fact.
Yeah, definitely. Liraz, any experience with having to kind of halfway house it because of developer resource?
No, actually, no. Actually, no. I have no experience with that. Like, we always try to prioritize it well, so dev will get it like most of the time. So it's just a matter of prioritization, I think.
Yeah, nice. Lucky you. Thinking SEO, a lot of what we have to do is compromise with developers and marketers, right?
And data goes a long way in that, right? If you have data to show, you're pulling up the coverage report in Search Console and saying, hey, these pages aren't getting crawled, but they're there in page 4, 5, 6. That's a very easy data point to show and get your point of view across.
Fab. Well, I think that wraps up this session with a minute to spare just to bring the other guys in for the next session. But thank you so much for joining me for this half hour. It's been an absolute joy. Thank you, everybody, for watching and for all of your questions over the past 2.5 hours. Thank you for sticking with me. This has been great.